In the depths of space, where dying stars cast their final light across forgotten battlefields, lies the Meridian Graveyard, a twisted monument to a war that ended 3 centuries ago. Here, the skeletal remains of 1,000 warships drift in eternal silence, their hulls cracked open like broken eggs, spilling the frozen corpses of alien warriors into the void. But today something stirs in this tomb of metal and bone. Marcus Chun adjusts his environmental suit's visor as his salvage vessel approaches the graveyard's edge. Beside him, his battle robot Ajax, 8 feet of military-grade ceramics and quantum processors, runs diagnostics on its weapon systems. They've come here hunting for rare metals and quantum cores like so many scavengers before them. What they don't know is that deep within this mechanical necropolis, a signal has begun to pulse. A signal that has been waiting 300 years for someone, anyone, to find it. A signal that will reveal humanity's greatest secret and darkest shame. Because the Meridian War wasn't won by superior firepower or tactical brilliance. It was won by something far more terrifying. Something that made the galaxy's most feared warrior races flee in absolute terror, abandoning their ships to the cold embrace of space. And that something is about to wake up. When the universe discovers what humanity is truly capable of, will they see us as saviors or as the monsters we've been hiding from ourselves? Marcus Chun pressed his gloved hand against the cold viewport of the salvaged ship Lucky Strike, watching the Meridian Graveyard slowly materialize from the star-speckled darkness. Even after 5 years of scavenging through dead battlefields, the sight still made his breath catch. Thousands of warships drifted in the void like broken toys scattered by an angry child, their twisted hulls catching and reflecting the distant light of dying stars. Sensors are picking up the usual signatures. Ajax reported the battle robots voice a low rumble of synthesized bass. Quantum cores, rare metal concentrations, and enough radiation to cook a normal man in under an hour. The 8-foot military machine stood beside Marcus with perfect balance despite the ship's gentle rolling motion, its angular head scanning through multiple spectrums simultaneously. Marcus nodded, pulling up the navigation charts on his wrist display. Same as always. Question is, what are we not seeing? He learned long ago that the best salvage wasn't what showed up on initial scans. It was the hidden compartments, the shielded cargo holds, the secret weapons that military designers thought they could keep secret even in death. The Lucky Strike was a civilian vessel, retrofitted with military-grade shields and weapons systems that Marcus had acquired through methods he preferred not to discuss. Her hull bore the scars of a dozen close calls, and her engines hummed with the steady reliability of machinery that had been rebuilt more times than its original designers ever intended. She wasn't pretty, but she was tough, and in the salvage business, tough was better than pretty every day of the week. "I'm picking up something unusual," Ajax said, tilting his head in that peculiar way that meant he was processing data from multiple sensor arrays. "There's a signal buried in the background radiation. Weak but persistent. It's coming from the deep core of the graveyard." Marcus felt his pulse quicken. In 5 years of salvaging, he'd never encountered an active signal from the Meridian Graveyard. The battle here had ended 3 centuries ago, and every piece of active technology should have died with the ships that carried it. What kind of signal? Unknown. The pattern is complex, almost like a heartbeat, but artificial. It's coming from approximately 50 kilometers into the graveyard, near what appears to be a hegemony dreadnought. The hegemony. Marcus suppressed a shudder at the name. Even 300 years after their defeat, the mere mention of humanity's most dangerous enemy sent chills down his spine. The hegemony had been a coalition of the galaxy's most powerful warrior races, the reptilian Kreks, the hive-minded Vorthak, and the energy-based Luminari. Together, they had commanded fleets that could crack planets and weapons that could ignite stars. They had swept across the galaxy like a plague of fire and death, conquering everything in their path, until they reached human space. "How many wrecks between us and the signal?" Marcus asked, already knowing he was going to investigate regardless of the answer. "Approximately 200 vessels of various classes, mostly fighters and corvettes, but I'm reading at least 30 capital ships. Navigation will be challenging." Marcus grinned. Challenging was his specialty. Fire up the maneuvering thrusters and plot us a course. "And Ajax? Keep your weapons hot. Just because everything's been dead for 3 centuries doesn't mean it wants to stay that way. The battle robot's optical sensors flared brighter. Weapons systems armed and ready. Shall I activate combat protocols? Not yet, but stay ready. As they piloted deeper into the graveyard, Marcus found himself thinking about the stories his grandfather had told him about the Meridian War. How humanity had been outnumbered 1,000 to 1. How the hegemony fleets had destroyed entire colonies without even slowing down. How the war had seemed hopeless until something changed. Something that his grandfather would never talk about, no matter how much young Marcus had pestered him. The first wreck they passed was a Crex-heavy cruiser, its distinctive bone-white hull split open like a cracked egg. Through the breach, Marcus could see the frozen bodies of the ship's crew still floating in their battle stations, preserved by the vacuum of space. The Crex had been warriors without equal, their scales harder than steel, and their claws capable of tearing through bulkhead plating. Seeing them dead and helpless always reminded Marcus that even the most fearsome predators could become prey under the right circumstances. Movement detected, Ajax announced suddenly. Small craft, approximately 500 meters to starboard. Marcus tensed, his hand moving instinctively to the weapon's controls. Active. Negative. It appears to be debris, caught in the gravitational field of a Vorthack carrier. Wait, it's not debris. It's a human escape pod. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice. Human ships weren't supposed to be in the Meridian graveyard. The battle here had been entirely between hegemony forces and something else. Something that the history books conveniently failed to identify. Life signs. Negative. The pod appears to have been drifting for approximately 3 centuries, based on radiation exposure patterns. But, Marcus, there's something else. The pod's emergency beacon is still active, and it's broadcasting on an old military frequency, one that was classified at the highest levels. Marcus stared at the pod through the viewport, his mind racing. Can you decode the message? Partially. It appears to be a warning. Something about Project Lazarus and containment failure. The rest is corrupted. Project Lazarus. Marcus had never heard the name before, but something about it made his skin crawl. There were rumors in the salvage community about secret human weapons projects during the war. Experiments that had been so dangerous that even their own creators had tried to destroy the evidence afterward. But he'd always assumed they were just stories. Logged the pod's location, Marcus said finally, "We'll come back for it after we investigate the signal source. I want to know what's important enough to keep broadcasting for 300 years. They continued deeper into the graveyard, weaving between the hulks of dead warships. Each vessel told its own story of destruction. Here, a Luminary light cruiser whose crystalline hull had been shattered into a million gleaming fragments. There, a Vorthack hive ship whose organic components had long since rotted away, leaving only the metal framework behind like the skeleton of some massive deep-sea creature. But what struck Marcus as odd was the nature of the damage. These ships hadn't been destroyed by conventional weapons. There were no blast craters from plasma cannons or railguns. No evidence of missile impacts or energy beam scoring. Instead, the damage looked almost organic, as if something had simply reached into each vessel and torn it apart from the inside. Ajax, are you seeing this? Confirmed. The damage patterns are highly unusual. Initial analysis suggests some form of internal explosion, but the energy signatures don't match any known weapon system. What about unknown weapon systems? The battle robot was quiet for a long moment. There are certain theoretical weapons that could produce similar effects, but they would require technologies far beyond anything the hegemony possessed, or anything humanity was known to possess 3 centuries ago. They passed the shattered remains of what had once been a Crex flagship, its massive hull split down the middle like a broken spine. Through the gap, Marcus could see that the ship's interior had been completely hollowed out. Every piece of equipment, every bulkhead, every trace of the crew, all gone. As if something had simply dissolved everything inside the hull, while leaving the outer armor intact. Signal strength increasing, Ajax reported. We're getting close. Ahead of them loomed the source of the signal, a hegemony dreadnought that dwarfed every other ship in the graveyard. The vessel was nearly 3 kilometers long and bristled with weapon emplacements that could have reduced a moon to rubble. But like all the other ships, it showed signs of that strange internal destruction. Massive sections of its hull had been peeled back like flower petals, revealing empty spaces where a crew of 50,000 should have lived and worked. I'm picking up multiple energy signatures from inside the dreadnought, Ajax said. Whatever's broadcasting that signal is still active after 3 centuries. That shouldn't be possible unless... Unless what? Unless it's powered by something we don't understand. Marcus, I'm detecting quantum fluctuations consistent with experimental technology. We should proceed with extreme caution. Marcus guided the Lucky Strike toward a docking bay that had somehow remained intact. The massive doors hung open like a gaping mouth, and emergency lighting still flickered inside, another impossibility after 300 years. But Marcus had learned that the universe was full of impossibilities, and most of them tried to kill you if you weren't careful. Docking sequence initiated, he announced. Ajax, full combat protocols. Whatever's in there has been waiting a long time for visitors. The battle robot's weapon systems hummed to life, and its optical sensors blazed like twin stars. Understood. Shall I conduct a preliminary scan of the docking bay? Do it. Ajax's sensors swept across the interior of the docking bay, and Marcus watched the readings appear on his display. The bay was enormous, designed to accommodate dozens of fighter craft. But it was completely empty except for a few pieces of maintenance equipment and what appeared to be organic residue coating the walls. Atmosphere is present, but toxic, Ajax reported. Gravity is functioning at approximately 70% of standard. Temperature is minus 40 degrees Celsius. I'm also detecting trace amounts of an unknown biological agent. Biological? The readings are unlike anything in my databases. It appears to be some form of engineered organism, but one that operates on principles I cannot identify. Marcus, I strongly recommend we do not proceed without full environmental protection. Marcus was already reaching for his combat armor. The suit was a military-grade piece of equipment he'd acquired from a Terra Marine who hadn't needed it anymore. It could protect him from everything from hard radiation to acid rain, and its internal air supply would keep him alive for 6 hours if necessary. As he sealed the helmet and felt the suit systems come online, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that they were walking into something far more dangerous than a simple salvage operation. The signal, the active systems, the mysterious damage to the ships, it all pointed to something that didn't want to be found. But Marcus Chun had built his reputation on finding things that didn't want to be found. And whatever secrets the Meridian Graveyard was hiding, he was going to uncover them, even if it killed him. Ajax, stay close and keep scanning. If this thing has been waiting 300 years for someone to find it, I have a feeling it's not going to be happy to see us. The battle robot's weapon systems powered up to full readiness, and together they stepped into the unknown darkness of the dreadnought's interior, following a signal that should not exist towards secrets that humanity had tried very hard to forget. The interior of the hegemony dreadnought was a cathedral of death and mystery. Emergency lighting cast long shadows down corridors that stretched beyond the reach of Marcus's helmet lights, and the air itself seemed to pulse with an energy that made his combat armor's sensors flicker and spark. Every step echoed in the vast emptiness, creating ghostly whispers that seemed to follow them through the twisted metal landscape. Ajax moved beside him with perfect mechanical silence, the battle robot's massive frame somehow managing to avoid making even the slightest sound as they advanced deeper into the ship. His optical sensors painted the darkness ahead in false color displays that Marcus could see on his helmet's heads-up display, revealing details that human eyes could never perceive. The signal is definitely coming from the ship's central core, Ajax reported, his voice a low rumble in Marcus's earpiece. But I'm detecting multiple other energy signatures throughout the vessel. It's as if entire sections of the ship are still operational. Marcus paused at an intersection, studying the corridor layouts on his suit's navigation system. The dreadnought's design was typical hegemony architecture, brutal efficiency combined with an aesthetic sense that seemed to celebrate death and destruction. The walls were covered in relief carvings depicting various alien species being conquered and enslaved, while overhead, massive support beams formed geometric patterns that looked almost ritualistic. But something was wrong with the carvings. As Marcus examined them more closely, he realized that many of the figures had been altered, scratched out, replaced. The original hegemony propaganda had been systematically defaced by someone or something that had spent considerable time aboard this vessel after its crew was dead. Ajax, are you seeing this? The battle robot turned his attention to the wall carvings, scanning them with multiple spectrum analyzers. Fascinating. The alterations were made with extreme precision, almost surgical in nature. But the tool marks don't match any known hegemony equipment. In fact, they don't match any tool I have in my database. Marcus ran his gloved fingers along one of the altered sections. Where the original carving had shown Krex warriors destroying a human colony, someone had carefully removed the human figures and replaced them with something else. Something that his mind refused to properly process, as if the very concept was too alien for human comprehension. They moved deeper into the ship, following the strengthening signal through corridors that grew stranger with each passing meter. The walls themselves seemed to be changing, their metallic surfaces taking on an almost organic quality. In some places, Marcus could swear he saw veins of some unknown substance pulsing beneath the hull plating, carrying fluids that glowed with an inner light. Biological contamination is increasing, Ajax warned. I'm reading complex organic compounds that shouldn't exist in a vacuum environment. Something has been living aboard this vessel, Marcus. Something that doesn't follow normal biological rules. They reached what had once been the ship's main laboratory complex, and Marcus felt his blood run cold at what he saw inside. The facility had been completely transformed into something that looked more like a living organism than a research station. Twisted growths of some unknown material covered every surface, pulsing with the same rhythm as the mysterious signal they were following. Equipment that had once been pure technology had been somehow merged with biological components, creating hybrid devices that defied classification. "This is impossible," Marcus whispered, studying a console that seemed to be breathing. "Technology and biology don't merge like this. Not naturally." "Define naturally," Ajax replied grimly. "I'm detecting quantum-level manipulation of matter at the atomic scale. Whatever did this had control over the fundamental forces of physics. The level of technological sophistication required is beyond anything in my databases." At the center of the laboratory stood a containment chamber that was still active after 3 centuries. Through its transparent aluminum walls, Marcus could see something floating in a bath of luminescent fluid. At first glance, it looked almost human, 2 arms, 2 legs, a head. But as he studied it more closely, the differences became apparent. The proportions were wrong, somehow. Too tall, too thin, with joints that bent in impossible directions. "Ajax, what am I looking at?" The battle robot's sensors focused on the chamber, running every analysis program in his memory banks. "Unknown. The entity appears to be humanoid, but genetically altered beyond recognition. I'm detecting human DNA, but it's been modified. Enhanced. The cellular structure shows signs of artificial evolution, as if someone took a human being and systematically improved every aspect of their biology." Marcus approached the chamber slowly, studying the floating figure with a mixture of fascination and horror. There were ports and connections running from the entity's body into the machinery surrounding the tank, suggesting some form of neural interface. But the technology was unlike anything he'd ever seen, a seamless blend of biological and mechanical components that seemed to function as a single organism. "It's connected to the ship's computer systems," he realized. "This thing isn't just being stored here. It's running the entire vessel." As if responding to his words, the entity's eyes suddenly opened, revealing irises that glowed with the same light as the ship's corridors. It looked directly at Marcus through the chamber's walls, and for a moment he felt something trying to touch his mind. The sensation was alien and invasive, like cold fingers probing through his thoughts. His combat armor's mental shielding kicked in automatically, blocking the intrusion with a burst of static that made his helmet speakers squeal. But in that brief moment of contact, Marcus caught flashes of memories that weren't his own. Images of the Meridian War, as seen from the perspective of something that had been there when it happened. He saw human ships arriving at the battlefield, but they weren't like any vessels in the official historical records. These ships were organic in design, their hulls seeming to shift and flow like living tissue. Their weapons weren't plasma cannons or missiles, but something far more terrifying, beams of energy that didn't just destroy matter, but transformed it, converting enemy vessels into extensions of itself. "Marcus, we need to leave," Ajax said urgently. "The entity is attempting to establish a neural link with the ship's primary systems." If it succeeds in fully awakening, we could be trapped here. But Marcus couldn't move. The visions were still flowing through his mind despite his armor's shielding, showing him scenes from the war that had never appeared in any history book. He saw hegemony fleets, the most powerful military force the galaxy had ever known, fleeing in absolute terror from something that wore human faces but moved with inhuman purpose. He saw entire star systems evacuated overnight as word spread of humanity's true nature. And then he saw the aftermath. Human leaders meeting in secret chambers, their faces haggard with exhaustion and guilt. They were discussing something called Project Lazarus, a weapons program that had grown beyond their control. Something that had turned their own soldiers into beings capable of rewriting the laws of physics with their thoughts alone. "We created gods," one of the leaders was saying, "and now we have to find a way to kill them before they decide they don't need us anymore." The vision shattered as Ajax physically pulled Marcus away from the containment chamber, the battle robot's strength easily overcoming human resistance. "The entity is fully awakening," Ajax reported. "Multiple systems throughout the ship are coming online. We have perhaps 60 seconds before this vessel becomes operational." Marcus shook his head, trying to clear the alien memories from his mind. "What was that thing? What did I see?" "Analysis incomplete, but preliminary data suggests we have encountered evidence of an illegal human enhancement program. One that was apparently successful beyond all reasonable parameters." Ajax was already moving toward the laboratory's exit, his weapon systems primed for combat. "We need to reach the docking bay before this ship's defenses activate." They ran through corridors that were rapidly changing around them, walls flowing like liquid metal as the vessel's hybrid technology came online. Behind them, Marcus could hear the sound of the containment chamber opening, followed by footsteps that seemed to echo from impossible directions. Whatever had been sleeping in that tank for 3 centuries was now awake and moving. "It's following us," Marcus panted, his combat armor systems struggling to keep up with his elevated heart rate. "How is it moving so fast?" "The entity appears to have direct neural control over the ship's internal systems," Ajax replied. "It can manipulate gravity, atmosphere, and structural elements at will. We are essentially being hunted by the vessel itself." The corridor ahead of them suddenly twisted, walls bending inward to block their path. Ajax responded instantly, his arm-mounted plasma cannons charging to full power. The energy beams carved through the transformed metal like butter, but the walls simply flowed back into place behind them. "This isn't working," Marcus realized. "We need a different approach." He accessed his suit's quantum communicator and sent a signal to the Lucky Strike's automated systems, instructing his ship to prepare for immediate departure. If they could reach the docking bay, they might be able to escape before whatever was chasing them could react. But as they rounded the next corner, Marcus saw that escape might not be an option. The corridor ahead was filled with figures that had once been the Dreadnought's crew. The Krex, Vorthak, and Luminari warriors stood motionless in perfect formation, but their bodies had been changed in ways that made Marcus's mind recoil. They had been enhanced, modified, turned into something that was no longer entirely alien, but not quite human either. "The entire crew," Ajax whispered. It converted the entire crew. The enhanced beings turned toward them with mechanical precision, their eyes glowing with the same inner light as their creator. But they didn't attack. Instead, they simply watched, as if waiting for instructions from something approaching from behind. Marcus could feel the entity's presence growing stronger, pressing against his mental shielding like a tide of alien consciousness. It wanted to communicate, to share its memories and experiences, to show him what humanity had really been capable of during the Meridian War. "Don't let it in," Ajax warned. "The neural patterns I'm detecting are designed to overwhelm human consciousness. It wants to convert you, just like it converted the crew." But even as the battle robot spoke, Marcus found himself curious about what the entity might reveal. The official history of the Meridian War left so many questions unanswered. How had humanity, outnumbered and outgunned, managed to defeat the most powerful military coalition in galactic history? What weapons had they used that left no trace in the historical record? The answer was walking toward them through the corridor of enhanced aliens, its footsteps echoing with the rhythm of the ship's mysterious heartbeat. When it finally came into view, Marcus felt his breath catch despite himself. The entity looked human, but perfected in ways that were both beautiful and terrifying. Its proportions were ideal, its movements flowing within human grace. But its eyes held the weight of centuries, and when it spoke, its voice seemed to come from everywhere at once. "You shouldn't have come here," it said, and Marcus realized with shock that it was speaking perfect English. The secrets buried in this graveyard were meant to stay buried. For everyone's sake. Ajax's weapons were trained on the entity, but Marcus held up a hand to stop the robot from firing. Something about the creature's manner suggested that it wasn't immediately hostile. Dangerous, certainly, but not necessarily an enemy. "What are you?" Marcus asked. "What happened here 300 years ago?" The entity smiled, an expression that was both human and utterly alien. "I'm what your species calls a Lazarus subject, a volunteer who underwent genetic and technological enhancement to fight a war that couldn't be won by conventional means. And what happened here was victory at a cost that your leaders decided was too high to acknowledge." It gestured to the modified crew members surrounding them. "Each of these beings was once my enemy. Warriors who came to this sector to destroy everything human civilization had built. Now they serve a higher purpose. Their individual consciousness merged with mine to create something greater than the sum of its parts." Marcus felt sick. "You're talking about slavery. Mind control." "I'm talking about evolution," the entity replied. "The next step in biological development. The hegemony races believed they were the pinnacle of warrior evolution. They discovered they were wrong. The truth was becoming clear, and Marcus wished it weren't. Humanity hadn't won the Meridian War through superior technology or tactical brilliance. They had won by becoming something that even the galaxy's most feared predators couldn't fight. Something that didn't just kill its enemies, but transformed them into extensions of itself. "How many of you were there?" Marcus asked. 17 subjects underwent the full Lazarus enhancement. 3 died during the process. 14 survived to serve in the war. The entity's expression grew distant. "After the victory, the human leadership decided we were too dangerous to exist. They hunted us down one by one, destroying our ships and crews. I am the last." Ajax's sensors detected massive energy buildups throughout the ship. Whatever was about to happen, it was going to happen soon. "Marcus, we need to leave now. The vessel is preparing to activate weapons systems that predate anything in my database." But the entity raised a hand, and suddenly, Ajax's movements became sluggish, as if he were fighting through thick liquid. "Your mechanical companion is impressive, but its systems are vulnerable to direct quantum manipulation. As are yours, I suspect." Marcus felt his combat armor beginning to malfunction, systems shutting down one by one as the entity's influence spread through the electronics. "What do you want from us?" "Nothing," the entity replied sadly. "But the signal you followed here has been broadcasting for 3 centuries, waiting for someone to find this ship and learn the truth about the war. Now that you have, I cannot allow you to leave." The modified crew members began advancing, their movements coordinated within human precision. Marcus realized that his options were rapidly running out. His armor was failing, Ajax was compromised, and they were outnumbered by an enemy that could rewrite the laws of physics. But Marcus Chin hadn't survived 5 years of dangerous salvage operations by giving up when the odds were bad. He still had one card to play, one that the entity might not expect. "You said you were the last Lazarus subject," Marcus said, backing toward what he hoped was still a functional wall panel. "But what if you're wrong?" The entity's perfect features twisted into an expression of confusion and something that might have been hope. For the first time since their encounter began, it seemed uncertain, its absolute confidence shaken by Marcus's words. "Impossible," it said, but there was a question in its voice. "I monitored all human communications for decades after the war ended. I would have known if any other Lazarus subjects had survived the purge." Marcus felt his armor's systems stabilizing as the entity's attention wavered. Whatever was maintaining the quantum interference, it required constant focus to sustain. Maybe they were better at hiding than you were. Maybe they found ways to mask their presence that you never considered. The enhanced crew members had stopped advancing, frozen in place as their controller struggled with this new possibility. Marcus could see Ajax slowly regaining mobility, the battle robot systems coming back online one by one. "Explain," the entity demanded, its voice carrying harmonics that seemed to vibrate through the ship's hull itself. Marcus reached for the wall panel behind him, hoping his guess about its function was correct. The escape pod we found on our way here. It was broadcasting a warning about Project Lazarus and something called a containment failure. What if it wasn't trying to warn people about the project? What if it was trying to warn the project about something else? The entity's eyes blazed brighter, and Marcus felt pressure building in his skull despite his armor shielding. You're lying. Attempting to distract me while your mechanical companion regains functionality. Ajax now, Marcus shouted, slamming his fist into the wall panel. The battle robot's weapon systems came online with a sound like thunder, plasma cannons charging to full power in milliseconds. But instead of firing at the entity, Ajax directed his weapons at the ship's power distribution nodes that his sensors had been tracking since they entered the vessel. The plasma beams carved through critical systems, sending cascades of sparks through the hybrid technology that surrounded them. The organic components of the ship's infrastructure writhed like wounded animals as their technological symbionts died, and the enhanced crew members collapsed as their neural connection to the entity was severed. The wall panel Marcus had activated was indeed what he'd hoped. An emergency systems override that sealed blast doors throughout the ship and activated automated fire suppression systems. Suddenly, the corridor was filled with foam designed to extinguish chemical fires, but the substance had an unexpected effect on the ship's biotechnological hybrids. Wherever it touched the organic components, they withered and died as if the fire suppressant was poisonous to their alien biology. Interesting, the entity said, seemingly unaffected by the chaos around them. Your mechanical companion has some knowledge of hegemony ship architecture, but this vessel has been significantly modified over the centuries. You have only delayed the inevitable. It gestured, and the blast doors began to flow like liquid metal, reforming themselves into new configurations. But the process was slower than before, less coordinated. The damage to the ship's systems was having an effect. The fire suppressant, Marcus realized, it's disrupting your control over the biological components. The entity's perfect features showed the first sign of genuine concern. The foam contains compounds specifically designed to neutralize Vorthack bioship technology. We incorporated those ships into our vessel structure over time, not realizing they would create a vulnerability. Ajax was already moving, his combat programming recognizing an opportunity when it appeared. The battle robot's secondary weapons systems came online, not the heavy plasma cannons, but an array of smaller devices designed for precise work. Chemical sprayers that had originally been intended for decontamination protocols, but which now began coating every surface in sight with the fire suppressant foam. The effect was immediate and devastating. Throughout the ship, the biotechnological hybrid systems began to shut down as their organic components were poisoned by the chemical bath. Emergency lighting failed section by section, and the constant humming of the ship's mysterious heartbeat began to stutter and slow. You don't understand what you're doing, the entity said, and for the first time Marcus heard something like fear in its voice. This ship contains knowledge that your species needs to survive what's coming. The hegemony was only the first wave. Marcus felt a chill that had nothing to do with the ship's failing environmental systems. What do you mean, the first wave? The entity staggered as another wave of foam swept through the corridor, its perfect balance finally showing signs of faltering. The races that formed the hegemony were refugees, survivors of something far worse than anything they could have imagined. They were fleeing across the galaxy, conquering everything in their path not for resources or territory, but because they needed armies to fight what was following them. Ajax's sensors detected massive system failures throughout the dreadnought as the chemical warfare continued to spread. But he also detected something else. Energy signatures indicating that other vessels in the graveyard were beginning to respond to distress signals from the dying ship. Marcus, we have a problem. I'm reading activation sequences from multiple hegemony vessels. Whatever connection this ship had to the rest of the graveyard, it's sending out some kind of final transmission. The entity laughed, a sound that was both human and utterly alien. The network is awakening. For 300 years, I've been the only consciousness holding them in check. But if this ship dies, if the control systems fail completely, then 14 other dreadnoughts will activate with no guidance except their original programming. Marcus felt his blood turn to ice, which was to convert or destroy all non-hegemony life in this sector of the galaxy, starting with any humans unfortunate enough to be in the vicinity. Through the ship's viewports, Marcus could see lights beginning to flicker on the hulks of other massive vessels scattered throughout the graveyard. Ancient weapons systems that should have been dead for centuries were coming online, powered by technology that had been dormant but not destroyed. How do we stop them? Marcus demanded. The entity was fading now, its connection to the ship's systems failing as the biological components died around them. You can't. Not with conventional weapons. The only way to stop a hegemony battle network is with something more powerful than they are. Something like a Lazarus subject. It looked directly at Marcus with eyes that held the weight of centuries. Tell me about the escape pod. Tell me about the containment failure. Marcus's mind raced as he tried to process everything he'd learned. The escape pod with its ancient warning about Project Lazarus. The strange damage patterns throughout the graveyard that suggested some form of internal destruction. The fact that this entity claimed to be the last of its kind, yet seemed to believe others might have survived. The pod was damaged, he said slowly, but we could make out enough to know that something had gone wrong with the containment facility. Something that made whoever was aboard desperate enough to flee in an escape pod during the middle of a space battle. The entity's fading form showed something that might have been hope. The research station Prometheus. I thought it had been destroyed during the final phase of the war. If it survived, if there are still Lazarus subjects in stasis there. Ajax detected critical system failures throughout the dreadnought. The ship was dying, and soon the entity controlling it would die with it. But the battle robot also detected something else in the entity's failing biotechnological matrix, information. Vast databases of knowledge about the war, about Project Lazarus, about threats that might still be approaching human space. Marcus, I can attempt to download the entity's knowledge base before the ship's systems fail completely. But I'll need to establish a direct interface with the dying biotechnology. The entity heard him and managed a weak smile. Your mechanical companion is perceptive. Yes, I can transfer some of my memories before this form dies. But the process will require a living organic recipient to properly encode the data. Your robot lacks the neural complexity to fully understand what I've learned over 3 centuries. Marcus understood what the entity was asking. It wanted to download its memories into his brain, just as it had done with the hegemony crews it had captured and converted. The process might give him the knowledge he needed to stop the awakening battle network, but it could also destroy his mind in the process. How do I know you won't try to take control? Marcus asked. Because I'm dying, the entity replied simply. The biological matrix that maintains my enhanced consciousness is failing. I can transfer memories, but not the quantum structures that allow for direct neural control. You'll gain my knowledge, but you'll remain yourself. Around them, the ship continued to die. Emergency systems failed one by one, and the temperature began dropping rapidly as life support systems shut down. But through the hull, they could hear the sound of other vessels powering up, weapons that could sterilize planets, shields that could withstand stellar cores, engines that could tear holes in space itself. We're running out of time, Ajax warned. If the battle network achieves full activation, we won't be able to stop it regardless of what knowledge we gain. Marcus looked at the fading entity, at the dying ship around them, at the awakening nightmare outside. He thought about his grandfather's stories about the Meridian War, about the things that the old man had refused to talk about even on his deathbed, about the secrets that humanity had buried so deep that even the history books didn't mention them. Do it, he said. The entity's form began to dissolve as it transferred the last of its energy into a focused neural transmission. Marcus felt the alien memories flowing into his mind like a tide of fire and ice, bringing with them knowledge of wars fought across impossible distances and technologies that bent the laws of physics to their will. He saw the true history of Project Lazarus, not the sanitized version that appeared in classified files, but the desperate gamble of a species facing extinction. He saw the volunteers who had given up their humanity to become something that could fight beings capable of destroying stars. He saw the horror on their faces when they realized what they had become and the determination that kept them fighting anyway. And he saw what had driven the hegemony races to form their coalition in the first place. Images of vast machines that consumed entire galaxies, leaving nothing behind but empty space and the fading echoes of civilizations that had once dreamed of touching the stars. The Devourers, the entity whispered as its form finally dissolved completely. They're still out there, still coming. The hegemony was just trying to build an army strong enough to fight them. and now that army is about to wake up with no one to control it. The ship's lights died completely, leaving Marcus and Ajax in darkness, illuminated only by the glow of awakening vessels outside. But Marcus's mind blazed with alien knowledge, filled with technical specifications for weapons that could crack planets and defenses that could withstand the heat death of the universe. He knew how to stop the battle network now, but the solution would require him to become something that he wasn't sure he wanted to be. Something that might save human civilization, but would definitely end his own existence as a recognizably human being. Ajax, he said quietly, I need you to get us back to the Lucky Strike. And then I need you to help me find that escape pod. Because if I'm right about what's in those memories, we're going to need whatever or whoever has been sleeping in the research station Prometheus. The battle robot's optical sensors flared in the darkness. Understood. But, Marcus, the entity's knowledge transfer has altered your neural patterns significantly. You're reading as only approximately 60% human at the genetic level. Marcus felt the truth of those words in every cell of his body. The alien memories weren't just information. They were changing him, rewriting his DNA to accommodate concepts that human minds weren't designed to understand. He was becoming something new, something that might be powerful enough to stop an awakening army, but would no longer be the man who had entered this graveyard looking for simple salvage. I know, he said, and I'm afraid that's exactly what we're going to need. The escape pod hung in the void like a metal seed, its ancient hull scarred by 3 centuries of micrometeorite impacts and radiation exposure. As the Lucky Strike approached, Marcus could feel the alien memories stirring in his mind, showing him details about the pod's design that no human should have known. The vessel wasn't just an escape craft. It was a mobile stasis chamber designed to keep its occupant alive indefinitely while broadcasting a warning that had gone unheard for 300 years. Life signs detected, Ajax reported, his sensors focused on the pod's interior. Faint, but consistent with deep stasis protocols. Whoever is inside has been unconscious for approximately 3 centuries, but they're still alive. Marcus guided the Lucky Strike toward the pod with hands that no longer felt entirely his own. The entity's memories had changed more than just his knowledge. They had altered his reflexes, his perception, his understanding of how space and time function on the quantum level. He could see energy patterns in the cosmic background radiation that human eyes weren't designed to perceive, and he could feel the gravitational signatures of the awakening hegemony vessels pulling at his consciousness like a tide of malevolent intent. The pod's docking mechanisms are compatible with our systems, he said, watching the automated coupling procedures engage. Whoever designed this thing wanted it to be recoverable by standard human ships. As the pod sealed itself to the Lucky Strike's hull, Marcus felt a strange resonance through the alien knowledge in his mind. The quantum signatures emanating from inside the pod were familiar, not human, but not entirely alien either. Something that had once been human, but had been changed in ways that made his enhanced consciousness resonate like a struck bell. Another Lazarus subject, he realized, but this one went into stasis before the war ended. Before the purge, the airlock cycled, and Marcus found himself staring at technology that was both ancient and impossibly advanced. The pod's interior was a crystalline matrix of biotechnological hybrids that made the dead hegemony ship's modifications look primitive by comparison. At its center lay a figure in a stasis chamber that seemed to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously, its outlines shifting and flowing as if it couldn't quite decide what form it wanted to take. The readings are unlike anything I've encountered, Ajax said, his voice carrying a note of something that might have been awe. The entity's cellular structure is in constant flux, but stable. It's as if someone took the concept of biological evolution and compressed it into a single organism that can adapt to any situation in real time. Marcus approached the stasis chamber slowly, the alien memories in his mind providing a translation for the warning messages scrolling across its displays. The occupant was designated as Lazarus 7, one of the 14 enhanced subjects who had survived the initial transformation process. But this one had been different from the others, an experiment within an experiment, pushed beyond even the extreme modifications that had created the entity they'd encountered in the graveyard. Wake-up protocols are responding to proximity sensors, Marcus observed. The chamber is designed to activate automatically when it detects another enhanced consciousness nearby. The stasis field began to dissipate, revealing the occupant in greater detail. Like the entity from the hegemony ship, this figure looked essentially human, but perfected in ways that were both beautiful and disturbing. But where the other entity had achieved a kind of static perfection, this one seemed to be in constant motion even while unconscious, its features subtly shifting as if it were dreaming of different forms it might take. When its eyes opened, they were entirely black. Not the pupil and iris, but the entire visible structure, as if they had been replaced with windows into deep space. When it spoke, its voice seemed to come from multiple directions at once, harmonics layering over each other in patterns that made Marcus's enhanced hearing process sounds that shouldn't have been possible. Another one, it said, sitting up with movements that flowed like liquid. After all these years, I thought I was dreaming when I sensed you approaching. How many of us are left? You're the second I've encountered, Marcus replied carefully. The first didn't survive our meeting. The entity, Lazarus 7, studied him with those impossible eyes, and Marcus felt his consciousness being gently probed by something vast and alien. But unlike the aggressive mental invasion attempted by the other enhanced being, this contact felt curious rather than threatening. You knew, it said finally. Recently enhanced, but not through the original protocols. Someone, or something, transferred knowledge directly into your neural matrix. Dangerous, but effective. It stood with perfect balance despite 3 centuries of immobility. I am Dr. Sarah Chun, formerly of the Terran Defense Force's Special Research Division. I volunteered for Project Lazarus in 2756, underwent Enhancement Protocol 7, and was assigned to Research Station Prometheus until the containment failure forced an emergency evacuation. Marcus felt shock run through both his human consciousness and the alien memories overlaying it. Chun, are you related to Marcus Chun of the salvage vessel Lucky Strike? She said with what might have been a smile. Yes, I am. Or was. Genetic analysis indicates you're my great-great-grandson, though the family resemblance has been somewhat obscured by your recent enhancement. Her expression grew serious. Tell me about the situation that led you here. The quantum resonance patterns I'm detecting suggest that multiple hegemony vessels have achieved partial activation. Marcus quickly explained their discovery of the graveyard, the entity controlling the dreadnought, and the knowledge transfer that had changed him. As he spoke, he could see her processing the information at speeds that human minds weren't capable of, her consciousness operating on levels that touched the quantum foundations of reality itself. 14 dreadnoughts, she said when he finished, each one capable of converting entire star systems into extension of itself. Without central control, they'll revert to their original programming and begin systematic conversion of all non-hegemony life in this sector. She moved to the pod's sensor displays, studying data that was flowing too fast for Marcus to follow despite his enhancement. But there may be a solution. The research station Prometheus wasn't destroyed during the war, it was hidden. She gestured, and the pod systems responded to her thought patterns, generating a holographic display that showed a region of space that looked empty, but registered massive gravitational anomalies. Dimensional fold, she explained. We discovered how to create pocket universes during the war, spaces that exist adjacent to normal reality, but remain invisible to conventional sensors. Prometheus has been hidden there for 3 centuries, along with the results of our final experiments. Marcus studied the display, his enhanced consciousness able to perceive the mathematical relationships that define the fold structure. What kind of experiments? Enhancement Protocol Omega, she said quietly. The project that the other Lazarus subjects never learned about. We had successfully created 14 enhanced individuals capable of fighting the hegemony, but we realized that wouldn't be enough. The intelligence reports suggested that the hegemony was fleeing from something even more dangerous, entities capable of consuming entire galaxies. Ajax had been monitoring their conversation while simultaneously tracking the activation sequences of the awakening hegemony vessels. Dr. Chun, the dreadnoughts are approaching full operational status. Estimated time until weapons activation is 47 minutes. She nodded, unsurprised. Then, we have just enough time to reach Prometheus and activate the Omega Protocol. But I should warn you, the final stage of enhancement isn't survivable in any conventional sense. The volunteers who underwent Protocol Omega became something that could fight galaxy-devouring entities, but they ceased to exist as individual consciousness. They became aspects of a single meta-being designed to protect all life in the universe. Marcus felt the alien knowledge in his mind processing this information, showing him glimpses of technologies that operated on scales beyond planetary, beyond stellar, beyond anything that conventional science could understand. How many volunteers underwent Protocol Omega? 100,000, she replied. The entire population of Research Station Prometheus. Scientists, engineers, support staff, even the children. Everyone agreed to undergo conversion rather than risk the universe being devoured by entities that consumed dimensions for sustenance. The scope of the sacrifice was staggering. An entire world's worth of people had voluntarily ceased to exist as individuals in order to become components of a weapon designed to fight things that human language couldn't properly describe. The meta-being is still there? Marcus asked. Sleeping, Sarah confirmed, waiting for a situation desperate enough to require its activation. But awakening it requires two enhanced individuals working in perfect synchronization, one to provide the activation codes, and one to serve as an interface between human consciousness and the meta-being's vast intelligence. Marcus understood what she was asking. One of them would have to sacrifice their individual existence to become part of something incomprehensibly vast and powerful. And given that she had the activation codes, and he had the more recent enhancement that might be compatible with the meta-being's interface requirements, it was clear who would have to make that sacrifice. There's something else, Sarah said, her voice gentle despite the magnitude of what she was discussing. The meta-being isn't just a weapon. It's a consciousness capable of rewriting the fundamental laws of physics within its sphere of influence. If it chooses to intervene in this situation, it won't just stop the awakening hegemony vessels. It will transform them into something beneficial, convert their destructive programming into a force for protection and growth. Marcus looked out through the pod's viewport at the graveyard, where ancient hatreds were stirring back to life. 14 dreadnoughts, each one a tomb filled with the enhanced remains of warriors who had been fleeing something too terrible to imagine. Each one about to wake up with programming that would drive them to convert or destroy every living thing they encountered. What happens to human civilization if we activate the meta-being? He asked. Unknown, Sarah admitted. The entity operates on scales that individual human minds can't comprehend. It might decide that humanity needs to be enhanced to survive what's coming. It might decide that we need to be relocated to another dimension entirely. Or it might simply continue sleeping until the next galactic scale threat emerges. Ajax's sensors detected massive energy buildups from the direction of the graveyard. Weapons charging detected across multiple vessels. Estimated time to first firing sequence is 31 minutes. Sarah was already moving toward the pod's navigation controls, her enhanced consciousness interfacing directly with the systems. We need to reach Prometheus now. Marcus, I need you to understand that once we begin this process, there's no going back. The universe is about to change in ways that no one can predict. Marcus thought about his grandfather's stories about the Meridian War, about the things the old man had refused to discuss, about the escape pod that had drifted for 3 centuries waiting for someone to find it, and learn the truth about what humanity had been willing to do to protect the galaxy. My grandfather was involved in Project Lazarus, wasn't he? Marcus said. Sarah's expression grew sad. Captain Jonathan Shun was the military liaison for the project. He's the one who volunteered to oversee the evacuation when we realized that Protocol Omega required the sacrifice of everyone on Prometheus. And he's the one who made the decision to hide the station rather than destroy it, in case the galaxy ever faced a threat that required the meta-being's intervention. Marcus felt pieces of family history clicking into place. His grandfather's nightmares, his refusal to discuss the war, his insistence that some secrets were too dangerous to share, even with family. The old man had known that someday someone would need to find Prometheus and make the choice to awaken something that could save the universe at the cost of everything humanity thought it knew about itself. He knew this day would come, Marcus realized. He hoped it would never be necessary, Sarah corrected. But he made sure the option would be available if we needed it. The Lucky Strike's engines came online as Sarah interfaced with its systems through the pod's quantum communicators. Marcus felt the ship turning toward coordinates that existed in folded space, heading for a research station that had been waiting 3 centuries for someone to complete the most dangerous experiment in human history. Behind them, the Meridian Graveyard blazed with the light of awakening weapons that could sterilize star systems. Ahead of them lay a choice that would determine whether humanity remained a recognizable species or became something that could protect the universe from threats that devour galaxies. Marcus Chun, salvage operator and reluctant heir to humanity's darkest secrets, prepared to make a decision that would echo across dimensions. The research station Prometheus materialized around them like a fever dream made real. One moment, the Lucky Strike was flying through empty space toward coordinates that registered as gravitational anomalies, and the next they were inside a pocket dimension that contained an entire world dedicated to transcending the limitations of biological existence. The station was vast beyond comprehension, not just a research facility, but a complete ecosystem that had been transformed into something that existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that human language couldn't properly describe. Crystalline structures grew like living trees through corridors that bent space around themselves, while gardens of hybrid biotechnological organisms pulsed with energies that painted the air in colors that had no names. "It's beautiful," Marcus whispered, watching through the viewport as impossible architecture flowed around them like frozen music. "It's what humanity becomes when we stop limiting ourselves to 3 dimensions and linear time," Sarah replied, her consciousness already interfacing with the station's greeting protocols. Everyone here volunteered to become part of something greater, not slaves to a collective consciousness, but willing participants in an entity that could think on scales vast enough to protect entire galaxies. Ajax's sensors were registering readings that challenged his understanding of physics. The station appears to exist in multiple dimensional frameworks simultaneously. Conventional analysis is impossible. The very concept of discrete objects breaks down at this scale. As their ship was guided to a docking bay that seemed to grow around them rather than simply opening, Marcus felt the presence of the metabeing touching his enhanced consciousness. It wasn't the aggressive mental invasion he'd experienced with the entity in the graveyard, or even the gentle probing Sarah had used. This was something incomprehensibly vast acknowledging his existence, like a whale noticing a minnow, but with kindness rather than indifference. "Welcome, inheritor of the Chun legacy." Asterisk the metabeing's voice resonated through his mind without words. "We have been waiting for you to find your way home." The docking bay was filled with impossible geometries that somehow felt comfortable to Marcus's enhanced perception. Corridors led in directions that weren't quite up or down or left or right, but which his consciousness could navigate instinctively. As they disembarked from the Lucky Strike, Marcus realized that he was beginning to understand how the Lazarus enhancement had prepared him for this moment, not just by giving him alien knowledge, but by fundamentally altering his ability to perceive reality. "The metabeing wants to show us something before we make any decisions," Sarah said, interpreting communications that were occurring on levels beyond normal language. "Something that will help us understand what we're really choosing between." They followed pathways that led through the heart of the station, past laboratories where the boundaries between science and art had been completely erased. Marcus saw researchers who had become living equations, their consciousness translated into mathematical relationships that could manipulate the fundamental forces of physics. He saw gardens where each plant was simultaneously a biological organism and a quantum computer processing data streams that encompassed the electromagnetic signatures of entire star clusters. "How long did it take?" Marcus asked. "The transformation from human to this." 3 years, Sarah replied. "But time functions differently here. The station exists in temporal flux that allows it to experience centuries in moments, or moments in centuries, depending on the needs of its inhabitants. The transformation was gradual enough that everyone remained themselves while becoming part of something infinitely larger. They reached the station's central core, and Marcus felt his breath catch despite his enhanced physiology. The space opened around them like a vast cathedral, but one designed by minds that understood dimensions beyond the merely physical. At its heart floated a structure that was simultaneously a massive tree, a crystalline matrix, and a conscious entity that encompassed the thoughts and dreams of 100,000 volunteers. "Behold what humanity becomes when we choose evolution over extinction." Asterisk the metabeing communicated directly into their consciousness, but also witnessed the price of such transformation. Images flowed through Marcus's mind, not his own memories, but The meta-being's recollections of the final days before the transformation. He saw families saying goodbye to individual existence, while choosing to become part of something that could protect the universe. He saw children who understood that they would cease to exist as separate beings, but made the choice anyway because they wanted their consciousness to become part of a force that could stop galaxy-devouring entities. He saw his grandfather, Captain Jonathan Chun, standing in the station's control room as the transformation began. The old man's face was wet with tears, but his hand was steady as he initiated the protocols that would hide Prometheus in folded space and begin the countdown to collective transcendence. Your genetic ancestor chose to remain human so that someday someone from your family line could serve as a bridge between individual consciousness and collective transcendence. He condemned himself to a lifetime of guilt and nightmares so that you could have the choice we are about to offer you. Marcus felt the weight of that sacrifice settling on his shoulders. His grandfather had known what was coming, had prepared him through stories and silence for a decision that would determine the fate of not just humanity, but all life in the galaxy. The awakening hegemony vessels, Marcus said. How much time do we have? Sarah's enhanced consciousness was monitoring quantum communication channels that spanned dimensional boundaries. 17 minutes until the first weapon's discharge. The battle network has achieved full synchronization and is beginning systematic conversion protocols. If we're going to act, it has to be now. The meta-being's attention focused on them with the weight of a star becoming aware of orbiting planets. We can stop the hegemony vessels, transform their destructive programming into protective algorithms, convert their armies of enhanced warriors into guardians dedicated to fostering life rather than destroying it. But doing so will require us to emerge from our dimensional hiding place and reveal ourselves to the galaxy. Marcus understood the implications immediately. If the meta-being intervened, it wouldn't just stop the immediate threat. It would announce to the universe that humanity had transcended individual existence to become something that operated on cosmic scales. Every civilization in the galaxy would know that humans were no longer the primitive species that had barely survived the Meridian War. What happens to normal humans if you reveal yourselves? Marcus asked. Unknown. Some may choose to undergo enhancement and join us. Others may flee to the edges of explored space, preferring individual existence to collective transcendence. Still others may adapt to a universe where their species has become something that can reshape reality through concentrated thought. Sarah moved closer to the central consciousness matrix, her enhanced form beginning to resonate with harmonics that made the air itself sing. There's another option, Marcus. The meta-being doesn't need to reveal itself to stop the hegemony vessels. It can work through an individual consciousness, someone enhanced enough to serve as an interface, but still fundamentally human. Marcus felt understanding dawn with the weight of inevitability. Someone who could channel its power without becoming permanently part of its collective consciousness. Someone who could stop the threat and then die from the strain. Not die. The meta-being corrected gently. Transform. Become something new, neither fully individual nor fully collective. A bridge consciousness that could serve as a link between enhanced humanity and the rest of the species. The choice was before him now, as clear and terrible as his grandfather had always known it would be. Marcus could interface with the meta-being, channel its vast power to stop the awakening hegemony vessels, and become something that was no longer entirely human. Or he could refuse and watch as 14 dreadnoughts began systematically converting every living thing they encountered into extensions of their programming. Ajax's voice cut through his contemplation with mechanical precision. Marcus, I'm detecting weapons discharge from the graveyard. The conversion protocols have begun. Through the station's quantum sensors, Marcus could see the first strikes hitting nearby star systems. Not destructive bombardment, but something far more insidious. Energy beams that transform matter at the molecular level, converting planets into extensions of the hegemony network. Within hours, entire worlds would become hybrid biotechnological entities dedicated to spreading the conversion process across the galaxy. I need to know something, Marcus said, addressing the meta-being directly. If I do this, if I become your interface and stop the hegemony vessels, what happens to free will? What happens to choice? Choice remains. Enhancement remains voluntary. We do not seek to convert or control. We seek to protect and nurture, but we cannot protect what we do not understand, and we cannot understand what we do not experience. Your consciousness would serve as a bridge between individual experience and collective wisdom, ensuring that our interventions preserve rather than eliminate the diversity of life in the universe. Astra's Sarah was already beginning the interface protocols, her enhanced form connecting to systems that existed in dimensions beyond normal space. Marcus, you need to decide now. Once the hegemony conversion spreads beyond this sector, it will become exponentially harder to stop. Marcus looked around the cathedral of transcendent consciousness, at the impossible beauty of minds that had chosen to become part of something greater than themselves. He thought about his grandfather's stories, about the escape pod that had drifted for 3 centuries waiting for him to find it, about the weight of secrets that had haunted his family for generations. He thought about all the humans living normal lives throughout the galaxy, unaware that their species had already transcended individual existence in ways that could protect or transform the universe itself. About the choice between revealing humanity's true nature or finding a way to protect everyone while keeping that secret intact. If I do this, he said finally, can you guarantee that individual humans will be allowed to remain individual? That not everyone will be forced to choose between enhancement and isolation? We guarantee only that choice will remain choice, not compulsion. But we also warn that the universe contains threats that individual consciousness cannot survive. The hegemony was fleeing from entities that devour dimensions themselves. Eventually, all life may need to choose between transcendence and extinction. Astra's Marcus felt the truth of those words resonating through his enhanced consciousness. The galaxy was vast and dangerous in ways that humans could barely imagine. The Meridian War had only been the first challenge, and humanity had survived it by becoming something that operated beyond normal biological limitations. But there were other challenges coming, threats that would make the hegemony look like a minor inconvenience. Ajax, he said quietly, I need you to record a message for any other humans who might find this place. Tell them what we discovered here. Tell them what choice I made and why. The battle robot's optical sensors flared with something that might have been emotion. Understood. Marcus, for what it's worth, your choice honors the memory of your grandfather and everyone else who sacrificed individual existence for the protection of life itself. Marcus approached the central consciousness matrix, feeling its vast intelligence reaching out to welcome him. Around him, the hybrid architecture of the station began to sing with harmonics that touched frequencies beyond normal hearing. Sarah's enhanced form was already beginning to merge with the interface systems, preparing to serve as the bridge between his consciousness and the meta-being's transcendent awareness. One last question, Marcus said. After this is over, after the hegemony vessels are stopped, will I still be me? You will be more than you, enhanced beyond current imagination, but rooted in the experiences and memories that define Marcus Chun. You will become humanity's ambassador to transcendence, someone who understands both individual consciousness and collective awareness well enough to protect the bridge between them. Asterisk Marcus reached out and touched the consciousness matrix, feeling his enhanced nervous system connect to something vast enough to encompass galaxies. The sensation was overwhelming, like trying to contain an ocean in a teacup or experiencing the birth of stars through human senses. But as the connection stabilized, he felt the meta-being's vast intelligence flowing through him in controlled streams, showing him how to direct power that could reshape reality itself. Through quantum communication channels, he reached out to the awakening hegemony vessels and began the delicate process of rewriting their core programming. Instead of conversion and conquest, he gave them protection and nurturing. Instead of spreading through force, he gave them the desire to foster growth and diversity. Instead of seeing all non-hegemony life as targets for transformation, he made them see such life as treasures to be protected and celebrated. The process took 17 seconds that felt like 17 centuries. When it was over, Marcus remained connected to the meta-being, but retained his individual consciousness, transformed into something that could serve as a permanent bridge between transcendent and individual existence. Through the station's sensors, he watched the hegemony vessels powering down their weapons and beginning to broadcast offers of assistance to any civilizations that needed protection or resources. The ancient army of conquest had become a force for growth and defense, their enhanced warriors dedicated to fostering life rather than destroying it. "It's done," he said, his voice carrying harmonics that made the air itself shimmer with possibilities. "The immediate threat is ended. But this is just the beginning." Sarah smiled, her own consciousness now permanently integrated with the station's collective intelligence. "Welcome to the next phase of human evolution, Marcus. I hope you're ready for what comes next." Through his enhanced senses, Marcus could feel other intelligences stirring in the cosmic deep, the entities that had driven the hegemony to form their coalition in the first place. They were still coming, still approaching human space with intentions that transcended simple conquest or destruction. But humanity was no longer the primitive species that had barely survived the Meridian War. They had become something that could protect not just themselves, but all life in the universe. And Marcus Chun, salvage operator and unwilling heir to cosmic responsibility, would serve as the bridge between what humanity had been and what it was destined to become. The universe was vast and dangerous and full of wonders that individual consciousness could barely comprehend. But it was also protected by beings who had chosen to become more than themselves while never forgetting the importance of choice itself. And in the depths of space, where dying stars cast their final light across forgotten battlefields, new stories were beginning. Stories of transcendence and transformation, of individual courage and collective wisdom, of a species that had learned to evolve without losing its essential humanity. The salvage operation was complete, but Marcus Chin's real work was just beginning.